Let me show you this church here. This is a church in Indiana, in Wheatfield, Indiana. It's First Church of Wheatfield. Years ago, they decided to start getting involved. They couldn't stand what happens to somebody who's trying to recover from an addiction. Where do you go? How do you get help with that? And so they bought a house and they started a addiction recovery program. So these people, when they're trying to get clean, they move into the house, and there's someone full-time there who does all the things you need to do to overcome a heroin addiction or a gambling addiction, usually there's a pretty big life-altering addictions. And then they started thinking, you know what, we need to help in other ways too. And so they started getting involved in the jail. And a lot of these people in jail, they have no hope. Many of them come from just horrific backgrounds. They never had a shot growing up, and so they turn to a life of crime or violence or drugs, and it gets them in prison or jail, and then what's the hope for them? And so they said, we can do more. And so they started, they reached out to the jail and said, we would like to start a church service for everybody who's in jail if they want to come. And so every Thursday night now, they run a jail ministry where they do church for all the people who are in jail. At their jail, half of all the men and women in the facility come to the service now, half. And so then, of course, when they get out, they can go into their recovery house to get further help dealing with the addictions that landed many of them in jail. And so this really cool thing is developing. The correction officers have said that the entire culture of the jail has shifted. They said, we can now see inmates actually caring for one another and thinking about life beyond bars, which, of course, they were not thinking about before this church came in and started serving them. And over again, what they're seeing are men and women who are putting their faith in Jesus, and their lives are being changed. And so it's such a cool story. And so now it's kind of inspired the community, and so more people are getting involved. There's a psychologist who comes and helps people who are in jail to deal with the mental health issues that are a factor in why some of them are in jail. They've started a gardening program outside the jail. They let the prisoners go out and garden during the day, and whatever they don't use in the kitchen in the jail, they give away to area communities, and then they're letting the prisoners know for the first time, many of them in their entire lives, how what they're doing is impacting others in positive ways. And so they're seeing all of this positive life change in this jail ministry as they just continue doing more and more and more. Isn't that what we need in America? You know the repeat rate for people who've been imprisoned? It's something like 90% of them will wind up right back in there. And yet here's a church that's saying, we're taking Jesus' command to visit those in prison seriously. We're going to do everything we can to really help them. And I heard that story, and I'm just like, there is nothing like the church when the church is the church. There is nothing like the church when the church is the church. Because who can bring hope? We sang a song about, I was a prisoner and you set me free. And as I was sitting there singing that, I was thinking about those guys singing that song in that place. Do you think the words mean a little bit more to them? I was a prisoner and you set me free. Now they're still behind bars, but spiritually set free. Imagine what it means to them to sing a song like that. There's nothing like the church when the church is bringing the hope of Jesus into this world and transforming it. It's why the Bible says this. Paul wrote to a young pastor named Titus, and he said, here's what I want, so that all of the Christians who are attending your church, who trust in God, will devote themselves to doing good. What would happen in America if the church and the people who say that they love Jesus were devoted to doing good? Just devoted to it. If you were using a word to describe your commitment to doing good in this world and serving in this world, would you use that word? Would you say you're devoted to doing good? That's a hard word to say. That's a hard word to say. And the world, of course, that we live in will tell you, well, you're a fool if you want to devote yourself to doing good. You're a fool. Because you're now going to have less money to buy things on Amazon if you devote yourself to doing good. And on top of that, you're not going to be able to watch all the new shows that just came out on Hulu and Netflix and Prime Video and on with all the new channels. You're not going to have enough time to watch all those things. And on top of that, you know what's going to happen? Some of those prisoners that you trust are going to betray you. Some are going to fall back into crime, and it's just not going to be worth it anyway. And so the world says, no, you are a fool to devote yourselves to doing good. And Jesus says, no, you are a fool if you don't do this. Because the truth is, this is essential. This is essential. 3 weeks ago, we started a series called Essentials. talking about life truths that matter. And what I said is, these are the most important things that I'm aware of in my life. There are 4 things that are essential in life. They are loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and we started this series with that one. They are loving your neighbors yourself, and we talked last week about not loving the nice ones. Anyone can love the nice ones, but loving your enemies, what does that mean? How do you love even those who disappoint you and hurt you and betray you? How do you love them? That's essential according to Jesus. And the third thing that's essential is this one, is that we take up our serving cloth in this world and we learn to serve just like Jesus. That is essential. And I want to just show you how essential it is. I want to ask you to open up your program, and inside you'll find these notes. If you haven't taken them out already, would you grab them? Grab a pen. There are going to be some things you're going to want to write down as we go through this today. Welcome, of course, those you're watching online. Love to hear the stories of people watching. If you go to our website at pennychurchlife.com, you can download the notes for free. So we're going to jump right into this. First thing that has to happen in my life, if I'm really going to move in the direction Jesus wants, is I have to learn how to prioritize serving. It's the first thing. Serving has to be my priority, not an option, not last on the list. I have to prioritize serving. So here's what I want you to know. There was an article, but pre-COVID, this is pre-COVID. Imagine how the numbers have changed. Pre-COVID, the article said this: Generation Me, why today's young Americans are more confident, assertive, entitled, and more miserable than ever before. Now that that headline got my attention. It was like, what? What are they talking about? And so they said, well, here's some facts about the typical 18-year-old in America. And again, this is pre-COVID. 17,000 hours of TV by the time they're 18. 11,000 hours of music, 2,000 hours of MTV and movies. That doesn't include all the new YouTube videos, Snapchat, everything else that goes on in this world that constantly comes up. And it's like glued here. And so it's just a massive amount of time in all of this entertainment. And yet, you know, if you've ever had a teenager at home, despite all of this entertainment, the number one spoken phrase in American homes today with teenagers is, I am so bored. More entertainment options than in the history of the planet, and bored is the outcome. Massive entertainment, massive focus on pleasure. And the consequences of all of this entertainment and focus on pleasure for this is pretty depressing. The average 20-year-old, when it comes to the topic of depression, is 10 times more likely to be depressed than their dad, and 20 times more likely to be depressed than their grandpa. So we have flooded our youth with entertainment options and pleasure options, and it's all about you. Just sit with that screen all the time, nonstop. And what's happened? They're more depressed and miserable than ever before. And imagine how those statistics went up when we couldn't leave the house for the last couple of years. I can't imagine how much the hours of TV watching have gone up since then. I mean, it's just like all we could do. So the article went on to say that there's a substantial difference between pleasure and happiness, right? Other people can give us pleasure, but they said this: neither you nor your children will be happy until you do things for other people. You will never be happy till you do things for other people. You cannot entertain yourself into happiness. You entertain yourself into depression. You can't be entertained into happiness, and pleasure alone ultimately produces boredom and low self-esteem. And the reason for that is because selfishness, when it becomes all about me all the time, produces nothing positive in this world. It's not what you were created for. When God made you and put you here on earth, he put you on earth for a special purpose. You are here to serve in some way in this world, to bring his love into some corner of this dark world. Jesus made it so clear the night that he was betrayed. He had met with his disciples. He had at one point in the meal, he got up and he took off his outer clothes. He put on a serving towel, and he got down and he washed his disciples' feet. It was a task that was so menial. Jewish servants couldn't even be forced to do this. It was so below them. And Jesus did it. And he got up and he got dressed, he sat down, and he said to them, Those who are the greatest among you should take the lowest rank, and the leader should be like a servant. He said, who's more important, the one who sits at the table or the one who serves? And obviously, the one who sits at the table, of course. But not here. I am among you as one who serves. And he had just shown them how much he was willing to serve them. So this is greatness, he said. We need to flip greatness upside down. In American society, it's still this way, right? The greatest one is the one who has the servants coming to them and doing whatever they say. And Jesus said, nope, not here. You follow me, then greatness is now taking the lowest place of servanthood in this world. So why is that great? Well, for multiple reasons. It's when we're most like Jesus. It's when we're most like Jesus is when we're serving. In Matthew 20:28, he said, even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others. This is what he came for. Second, it's rewarded for all time. It's rewarded for all time. There are few things that you do that are going to last. Few things, right? You know, all of my high school wrestling medals are in a box. I'm under no illusion that they will live on much longer after I'm gone, right? Somebody's going to clean it out. They're going to say, what are all these things? Oh, Dad had these, Grandpa had these, and off they're going to go, right? They don't outlive me. Most of what we have and store up and accomplish, that's not going to outlive us. But Jesus says what you do for others and out of love for them lasts forever. My favorite, one of my favorite, I have a lot of favorites in the Bible. One of my favorite stories in the Bible is in Matthew chapter 25. Jesus told the story. He said, here's what's going to happen at the end of time. He said, people are going to be brought. Everyone's going to come in front of the king. God, our king, will be on his throne. And he said, there will be separation. He said, like you separate sheep from goats. And so he said, the goats will be set to one side, and the sheep will be sent to the other side. And he said, he will say to the sheep as they're being separated, he said, I want to thank you because I was hungry and you gave me some food. And I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. And I was in prison and you visited me, and I was homeless and you took me in. And he said, they're going to say to him, when did we ever see you and do that for you? And Jesus will say this. You know what he says, right? You've all heard me say this. He says that what you've done for the least of these on this planet, you've done for me personally. He takes our serving personally every time we serve another human being out of love. Every single time. And it doesn't matter how big it is. He even later says something about even just giving a cup of cold water to somebody who's thirsty. That level of attention to our serving is how closely God is paying attention. Your serving matters to him. And then he says, come enjoy the reward that's been prepared for you. To everyone who's been a servant, your medals may not last, your accomplishments may not last, your bodies won't last, but your service will last for all eternity and be rewarded for all time. Third, it changes lives, and I love to talk about this one. Interestingly, as I was prepping this, I came across another story of another church in Indiana. So this church in Evansville, Indiana, made the news recently because they partnered with an organization I've only talked about one time, but we are going to do this someday. I've talked about this, RIP medical debt, RIP medical debt. And you can see the red box, eradicate medical debt at pennies on the dollar. So what they do is they go in and work with hospitals and insurance companies to say, how much will you let us, because they want to get something, and so they'll take pennies on the dollar. So they work with these organizations, and you can see right below it, so every $100 relieves $10,000 in medical debt. Because they just want to get something. So so churches have started to see this. And this church in Indiana raised $15,000 to give away to pay off the medical debt in their county, which turns into, if you add 2 zeros to that, it turns into $1.5 million in medical debt. Earlier this year, I told you the story of a church in Arizona that paid off all the medical debt of every person in their county. Can you imagine being a part of that? Wouldn't that be awesome, church? Someday we're going to do that. Someday we are going to contact and get connected with this organization. We're going to find out how much medical debt is in our county. And wouldn't it be incredible to raise enough money to pay the medical debt of every person in our county? And then, they contact them and say, hey, your friends at this church just wanted you to know you don't owe this debt anymore. Do you know anyone with medical debt right now that's got a ball and chain around their ankle because of it? You imagine doing this, church? Talk about changing lives. That's what serving does. That's going to be a cool day. That's going to happen. But it's also the key to happiness, which is so much fun you can Google this. But I love science. I love the field of neuroscience. You can hook your brain up to a machine and watch what happens when you do things or say things. And so there was an article this last week, scientific research provides compelling evidence that giving is a powerful pathway to personal growth and lasting happiness. The article said, we know that giving activates the same parts of the brain that are stimulated by food and sex. Giving does that. And so their article concluded with helping other people may just be the secret to living a life that's not only happier, but healthier and wealthier and more productive and meaningful. So Jesus knew what he was talking about when he said, you want the great life? The great life isn't the one sitting at the table being served. Flip it upside down. Greatness is found in serving. It counts for all eternity. It makes you happy. It changes people's lives. You can be a part of something incredible if you become a servant and you prioritize serving. So what do? Well, this is the hard part. The hardest part of this entire thing is right here. You got to let yourself see pain. You got to let yourself see pain, which is like something none of you want to write down, right? I wish I could see more pain. None of you want to see more pain. I don't want to see more pain. But serving is connected to this. Did you know there's something fascinating? There's a dynamic, I've talked about it for years. I've read about it, that what happens as income levels go up. Take a wild guess. What do you think happens to generosity levels as income levels go up? A, giving goes up. B, giving remains the same. B, giving goes down. Isn't it amazing? The wealthier we become, the less we give. So there was a psychologist at UC Berkeley who wanted to figure out why. It doesn't make sense, right? The wealthier we get, the more generous we should become. And it's not what happens in America. The more we get, the more we earn, the less we give, the more we just don't care. And so one of the things that they did is they studied, and in their research, they discovered this psychologist discovered this. His research suggests that exposure to need is what drives generosity, but isolation from the needs of the world drives self-centeredness. So what he discovered is what happens when your income goes up and all of a sudden you're making a lot of money. Where do you move? You move into neighborhoods like this, where the biggest tragedy is, oh my goodness, did you see Buffy's new BMW? There's a scratch on the door. We should start a GoFundMe page for her. It's like, oh, poor Buffy. It's like, that's the biggest tragedy they see. I broke my 9-iron last week. Oh. It's like the biggest tragedy. You become completely insulated and isolated from the needs that exist in the world, right? I mean, truthfully, just living in a small town isolates us at a certain level. Because I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever seen a homeless person sleeping on the courthouse stairs in Dodgeville. But when I went to school in Chicago, you couldn't walk to the Walgreens without walking around homeless people. And what they discovered is that wealthy people who live in mixed income environments are far more generous than people who isolate themselves away from the needs of the world. And so his conclusion was this: isolation brings selfishness. Now, the interesting thing about that sentence is it's exactly what Jesus taught years and years ago, 2,000 years ago. Are you familiar with the story of the Good Samaritan? Remember this story? Jesus was talking about essentials to a teacher of the law. And he said, number one thing is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And number two is to love your neighbor as yourself. Now, the teacher of the law, when he heard this, said, well, who's my neighbor? And Jesus said, and I'm paraphrasing, great question. Let me explain who your neighbor is. And he tells this story. He says there was a Jew, and you got to understand at the time, Israel was like this big long column in the Mediterranean, just off the Mediterranean Sea, and it had a northern part and a southern part, but the middle part was inhabited by people who didn't quite have the same Jewish beliefs. They were called Samaritans, and their practice of their religion was a little different. So Jews at the time hated the Samaritans, hated them because they perverted their religious beliefs. It's sort of like what happens now between, in the Middle East today, between Jews and Muslims. There's a lot of conflict, right, between the two. So there was this disgust between the two groups, between Jews and Samaritans. And that's important because one day it says there was a Jew who was traveling along a road and he was mugged and he was left for dead on the side of the road. They stripped him, they beat him, left him, dying on the side of the road. But then Jesus tells a story. He says, good news, along came basically a pastor, because they didn't have a church, they had a temple, and so a priest came along. And here's what Jesus says in the story. By chance, a priest came along, and when he saw the man lying there, look what he did. He crossed to the other side of the road. Because if I go to the other side of the road, I don't have to look at you. Because he's here, and now I'm moving away from him. Because I don't want to see him. And so if I don't see him, I can just ignore him and keep going. And Jesus tells a story, and then he says, and then someone else, a temple assistant, someone else who worked in their church at the time, comes along and says a temple assistant walked by. And he looked at him, and what does he do? Same thing. He gets away from him. Because if I pass away from you, if I get to the other side, I don't have to look at you, and if I don't have to look at you, then I can ignore you and keep going. So isolation breeds selfishness, just like the article said. It's like if I don't look at you, I don't have to see this. But then along came a despised Samaritan. And when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. And in the story, it's incredible. He tends to the man's wounds. He gets him stable. He puts him on his donkey. He takes him to an inn. He gives 2 days full wages to the innkeeper to take care of him while he's gone, and says, when I come back, I'll pay the bill if there's anything else. So he took all this money, all this time out of his way. He cares for him, and the key is right here. But this time, when he saw the man, he felt compassion. The other guy saw the man and looked away, right? Went to the other side of the road. He saw him and kept looking, and because he looked, it went from his eyes to his heart. And because it went to his heart, he served. So if you are going to serve in this world, you cannot live with blinders up to the needs of the world. As painful as it is, you've got to let yourself see. It's the only way to really be the Christians that he wants us to be. So let me help you see. Our focus for the month of April, for those of you who are watching online, is an organization called Feed My Starving Children. It's an incredible organization. They've figured out how to create this food that you can give a starving child anywhere on the planet. All they need to do is boil water to be able to make it, and then it keeps them alive. It costs less than 25 cents to buy a meal for a starving child. $88 will feed a child for a year. So I did the math, and it's, if we could raise as a church in the month of April $450, we will save 5 children for an entire year. 5 children will not die for an entire year because we put our pocket change in a little bowl. So boys like this guy don't have to starve to death, or girls like her. Look at that. One of my favorite before and after stories. At arrival, that child on the left is 14 months old, 7 pounds. 1 month later after eating, 12 pounds. And look at the difference. Africa is the place where the most children under 5 starve to death, so that's why you see a lot of pictures from Africa. And then I wanted you to see the statistic. 6,200 children starve to death every year around the planet, and that's what I typed, and then I realized, oh, sorry, I made a mistake. 6,200 children starve to death every day. Do you see? Are you okay living in a world where 6,000 children will starve to death today? The statistic is like once every 3 seconds. And that's just children under 5. That doesn't count adults. You got to let yourself see what's actually happening to be the servant in the world God has called you to be. And then we're going to jump down to number 4. Number 4 is go and do. Go and do. Jesus, this master storyteller, I just love how he tells stories. So he tells the story of the Good Samaritan. And if you were in the crowd that day, if you would have been a Jew in the crowd listening to Jesus talk about this, and the hero is a Samaritan, your mouth would have been like this. Are you kidding me? So that Jesus kind of sums it all up, and he says to the teacher of the law, the guy who asked him the question, he said, which one of the 3 was a neighbor to the man who was in the ditch? Which one was a neighbor? And the teacher of the law says, well, the one who helped him. And Jesus says, okay, you got it. Here you go. Jesus said, yeah, now go and do the same. Did you see those words? Go and do. What's happened in American Christianity with COVID is that we have struck that verse from our vocabulary. Because one of the saddest parts for me as a pastor is, pre-COVID, we served all the time. Many of you served way more pre-COVID than after COVID, right? Because all of a sudden we shut down the church. We couldn't even have services. Then we started having services, but few people could come because we had to be safe. And believe me, I got COVID. I totally get why you needed to be safe, because that was rough. So, we needed to be safe, and people's health mattered. And there are still people I know watching online who have not come yet because they're concerned about their health, and totally get that. But one of the things that's lost in all of this was serving. And it became instead, why don't you go and watch a service online? Or go and learn, or go and judge, or go and criticize. How many have fallen into go and protest, go and complain? And what's the command from Jesus? Go and do. Go and do. And the thing that makes me saddest, and we haven't figured out how to crack this nut for all the people who are watching online yet, is if you watch online, you never see all the go and do that happens around here. If you just click on a link and you watch a sermon, glad you're watching, but that's not the end of Christianity, is to go and watch. The end of Christianity is what Jesus said, and it's go and do. And if there isn't a do attached to your Christianity, it's not Christianity. It's something else, but it's not Christianity. Because without this, we are not followers of Jesus. Because we're not even becoming what he asked us to become. And this is really important to me. Really important to me. And again, for those of you watching online, you haven't seen what this church has done in the last few months, and I just wanted to show you. In December, we heard about this family in Mexico. It's actually a graduate of Dodgeville High School. For those of you watching in Minnesota, Dodgeville is right about 15, 20 minutes away from here. And she was a valedictorian of her class. Her name was Drasana Driscoll. Many of the people at the church knew her family. She graduated from high school, went on a missions trip to Mexico, into a dangerous part of Mexico, a border town. And she fell in love with a guy, and she got married, and so she and her husband run this ministry to inner city, basically high poverty, high risk kids. She was telling me, we were trading messages this last week, she said many of these kids deal with violence every week. If it's not domestic violence, it's violence in the community. I looked up the community where she lives, and it's one of the communities where, I truthfully would be scared to go to, and she lives there and serves there with her family. And so they put up this building, and we heard about this in December, and they educate kids, and they care for kids, and they feed kids, and she said, but it's too small, we need another one. And so we just tossed it out to the church in January, not even knowing, because they needed $2,500 to build another room. And I didn't know if we could raise $2,500, and the church gave over $5,000. And we built another building is being built for them. And this is so cool. Somebody runs a ministry where they turn old semi-trailers into kitchens. Look at that. And someone donated one to her, and so I think part of what we gave helped them get this trailer across. And so I have pictures of them setting the trailer up, and I forgot to put them in here. But they've got the trailer set up, and so now they have a kitchen where they can feed hundreds of kids. And this is the beginning of water. It's kind of how they do it down there. She was selling me pictures. I don't know. It's not like you just tap into the sewer and water lines, but this thing is filled with water constantly. So now they have water on the site. And so they have children coming all the time. And in the weeks ahead, I'm going to tell you stories about some of the kids as they feed them and teach them and work with them and the transformation they're seeing. You can see some of the poverty in the area. But I showed you you this slab because she wrote me yesterday and said, this is the beginning of a bathroom. Wouldn't it be great to have a bathroom for the kids? And I said, well, I'll tell the church, who knows what'll happen. Who knows? But, for all of you who've given this first few months of the year, you're going to someday stand in front of the King who's going to say, I was in an abusive home in a scary environment, and you fed me and you took care of my needs. Thank you. And you're going to say, when did I ever do that for you? And the King is going to say, what you did for one of these kids, you did for me. Then we heard that the food pantries are really struggling with the interest rates being so high in our area. There are a lot of people hungry. And so I'm sorry, I always forget to take final pictures of all the food that was donated. So this is just a couple of weeks in. I don't remember how much more came in after this, but to all of you who fed the hungry, the King is going to say, hey, thanks, because I was hungry and you fed me. Thank you. Because you did what Jesus said, go and do. You went to a store and you bought peanut butter and cereal, the two biggest needs. And Christmas, we heard about the homeless, and in January it was so cold, and the number one need they asked for is socks, and so we bought this huge stocking. It was like 2.5, 3 feet tall. It doesn't look like in the picture. And we asked you to bring socks in. And you brought so many socks in, we had to buy another stocking just to put all the socks in that we delivered to homeless people. And you did that. Because the command is this. And if your Christianity doesn't have a do component to it, understand you will never experience the love of God from that place. You will never experience anything supernatural because you're not following until your Christianity has a do attached to it. Does that make sense? He's so clear at the end of the story. Go and do the same. So, the question is, of course, how do you see yourself? Do you really see yourself as a servant in this world? Do you see yourself as a servant in this world? Do you understand how important serving is? And if you're sitting here today and you're like, okay, I know I need to start, then great. We've got 3 sign-up sheets in the back. You can sign up to bring a meal to a needy family. You can sign up to start serving each other. But what I really want you to do is if you don't have one of those bowls back there, and again, for those of you watching online, we're giving bowls away that you can put your pocket change in for Feed My Starving Children. You can do the same thing. Take a bowl and put your pocket change in it. Wouldn't it be amazing if all of us could try and raise $88 instead of keeping 5 kids alive for an entire year, we kept 50 kids alive for an entire year? Wouldn't that be cool to be a part of a church that did that? To know it may be the greatest accomplishment of our year, right? It could seriously be the highlight of the year to be a part of saving a child's life who's going to starve to death if we don't do this. And this is Jesus' command, go and do. Let me have you bow your heads as we finish today. Maybe the next step spiritually is to let Jesus Christ give you this first amazing gift of forgiveness. You are more loved than you have ever imagined by this God. He has always been after you. You may not be aware of it, and you may not have heard him or seen his activity, but when you get to heaven, you will see that there was never a moment he wasn't chasing after you because he loves you so much, just waiting for you. And the proof of how much he loved you is forever displayed on the cross. When Jesus died on the cross, he paid in full for what we've done that's wrong. And if you will let him, Jesus will forgive you and make his home inside of you. If this is what you want, then today, make a decision today. In your heart, say something to Jesus like this. Say, Jesus, I'm turning to you today. Please make peace between me and the Father. I've heard that you died for me, for the unloving things I've done. Please forgive me. Make your home inside of me today. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, as we finish up today, if you want to take your connection card. I think you have these, so these should be in your program. If you wouldn't mind grabbing one of these and just putting your name down, letting us know you're here. But if you prayed and asked Jesus to forgive you or renewed your commitment, check that box. Let us know what you've done. Or maybe you want prayer about something. Or maybe you're ready to start getting more involved. You can just let us know. This is how you communicate with us as a church. Then just drop it in one of the 2 offering boxes back on the wall where you came in. Thanks so much for coming. Go and do.